Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. On this episode, I sit down with former athlete, now professional dietitian, and owner of Compete Nutrition, Gyimah. Diet and nutrition are incredibly important topics, as many of you know, more so now than ever with social distancing in place. Asia joins the show to share her thoughts on nutrition in relation to diets, athletics, and staying healthy while practicing social distancing. It's an awesome conversation, and I hope you all enjoy it. As always, if you enjoy the show or podcast, throw a subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and follow me on Twitter for the latest episodes. That said, please welcome my guest, Gyimah. Welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. I am joined by a former athlete as well as registered dietitian, Gyimah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Awesome to have you on the show today. Actually been really looking forward to this because you shared a bit of information about how you were kind of focused on helping people manage through social distancing as of late. As many out there already know, with the coronavirus, it's been a bit of a challenge, so to speak, to really maintain a diet. And I can speak for myself as well as my girlfriend on this because we both are pretty active. I try to go to the gym on average 5 to 6 times a week, but with the gyms closed down over here, I've noticed it's been extremely difficult to really maintain any sort of diet, let alone any physical activity that I'm used to. And I'm assuming you're an expert on this because you tend to help people with their diets as well as with exercise and performance in this area. So to really just start here, how can athletes and general viewers maintain sufficient dietary intake or even macros in a time like this with COVID-19, considering that fresh meats are hard to come by and there's minimal stock in grocery stores?
Yeah, I think you summarized it perfectly. I mean, our routines are so much different than what they usually look like, and at the end of the day, all of the progress that you've been making is based on calories in, calories out. So, it's a lot different now because our calories out from exercise are a lot lower than before. And it's tempting to be snacking all the time when you're by the kitchen. So, one thing that I usually stress to my clients or just some of my friends who are still athletes is that, you know, it's fine to eat whenever you're hungry, or sometimes when you just really want a snack or when you're bored, but it just really depends on the things that you're choosing to eat, obviously. So I like to stress about vegetables. Those are probably the best snack you can have, or frozen fruits are my favorite. And just because the grocery stores, I mean, I don't see our food supply chain, crumbling anytime soon.
Right.
But it's all about planning. So if you're going to the grocery store and you're not planning on going back for another 2 weeks, I guess, you can get by with tons of fruits and vegetables that last a long time in the fridge, like carrots and apples. But then also frozen fruits and vegetables are fantastic for times like this.
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty guilty of this as of late. My girlfriend and I would literally bake different breads and pastries these past few weeks, all things considered, because many people are literally stocking up on flour and baking ingredients because it's hard to come by breads and whatnot in the store.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean, you kind of want to eat vegetables, you want to eat fruits during this time. But when people are stocking up during this time of panic, they're stocking up on canned foods. So that considered, I mean, what is the approach or what kind of tips do you have for meeting these needs if people are stocking up specifically on canned foods?
Are you referring to if you yourself have a lot of canned foods in the house, or if you can't, purchase canned foods because other people have been hoarding them?
So, I mean, either works, but I'm saying typically when people are stocking up on canned foods and that's all they have in their pantry.
Well, I'm gonna be honest, even in my kitchen, canned foods are always a staple in the house. Like most of my meals, I live in Canada, so when I was living in Ottawa for school, most of my meals were from canned foods like chickpeas, canned lentils. I really like canned tuna and salmon a lot.
Hmm.
But there's lots you can do with them. With chickpeas specifically, you can roast them, you can add them into salads, you can turn them into like a chickpea salad and have them on a sandwich. There's a lot that you can do. Um, my favorite is probably frying up some chickpeas with some onions and adding some coconut milk and vegetable broth, and then making sort of a curry out of that with some curry powder.
Hmm.
It's very simple and it lasts a really long time. So there's tons that you can do with chickpeas, and I'm a huge fan of chickpeas because they got tons of fiber, carbohydrates, protein, iron, all the good stuff.
So this is something or a meal you would kind of consider to be something that is very sustainable during a
Hmm.
time where you don't really have time to go to the grocery store, or there's not enough food in stock on the shelves, so you kind of want to put something together that's going to stay well in the fridge for at least a few days or even a week while you're waiting for stores to replenish what they
Yeah,
have.
and chickpeas, like in the can, they last over 5 years. And in the fridge, if you leave them in if you leave them in soaked water, they'll last probably, over 2 weeks. So,
Hmm.
if you don't have chickpeas, go out and get some like right now.
So at a time like this, people are often in their households trying to social distance themselves, and they kind of get into a rut when it becomes, they're not going out, they're not under their normal routine where they're going out for lunch, they're eating a healthy breakfast, or they're going out for dinner. They're in their households all day, and because of this, their eating habits might change. They might eat less, they might eat more. So going back to your example of calories in, calories out relative to how much exercise you maintain through the day, does that, in your perspective, change how much people should be eating now? Like, should people be eating less now that they're not active as much?
It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. But at the end of the day, I never like to tell people to remove things from their plate or to eat less than they normally do. It's really all about proportions. So, I stress eating vegetables a lot because it's pretty much free calories. So you can eat as many vegetables as you want, and it's just nutrients and water. That's pretty
Hmm.
much all you're getting from it. So what I say is usually a quarter of your plate should be protein, a quarter of your plate should be carbohydrates, and then the last half of your plate should be mainly vegetables. And if you're eating a lot of vegetables, you can easily get full from that. So it's not about, subtracting the amount of food that you're eating in a day. It's about just changing the way your plate looks and the portion sizes.
In terms of your clientele, have there been any noticeable challenges you faced when working with them under these current circumstances?
Well, right now it's just about them kind of sticking to a routine, something that they're used to. Because when I'm working with clients, a lot of my recommendations are very guideline based. It's not, I will rarely make somebody a meal plan because it's really hard to follow. So
Hmm.
the guidelines I'll give are okay, add some protein to your breakfast to help keep you fuller for the rest of the day. But now, because people's routines are all over the place, some of my clients aren't able to meet that protein guideline at breakfast or even eat breakfast because, they're waking up a lot later or they haven't been able to go to the store and fill up on Greek yogurt. So the breakfast guideline is probably the one that usually gets left behind easily,
Hmm.
even though it's very important to eat breakfast.
Would you consider that to be the most important meal of the day? I mean, from the research I've read in the past, people say that if you're going to eat a single meal throughout the day, it should be like a very large breakfast because that can tend to energize you throughout most of the day at least.
Hmm. Well, for me, I like to consider breakfast as the first meal you eat when you wake up.
Hmm.
And that should be a pretty sizable meal, but there's three guidelines that I tell my clients about breakfast, and it's color, grains, and protein. So as long as you're having all three of those, colors
Uh-huh.
meaning fruits and vegetables, as long as you're having all three of those at your breakfast or whatever meal it is, like your first meal of the day, you should be okay, and it should sustain you for a few more hours. But I
Hmm.
understand intermittent fasting is a really big, it's a big fad right now. And I understand that because, you can get weight loss results with it. But um, either way, that first meal of the day, whether it's at 7 a.m. or if it's at 12 p.m., it should have color, grains, and protein.
So when people are intermittently fasting, and in such cases, at least where people aren't as active as they usually are, do you think that intermittent fasting can be more of a hindrance if they're not working out and they're in their house most of the day?
I would not say so just because I rarely recommend intermittent fasting to athletes because they need the consistent amount of calories to help them, maintain their energy needs for the day with their practices and training and such. But if you're not training and you're not as active, I wouldn't necessarily say that um, you need to be eating, all around the clock. But depending on, your medical history, like if you have diabetes, you should not be intermittent fasting. But for the general healthy person, I wouldn't say yes, and I wouldn't really say no to intermittent fasting. It really depends on you. So, um, depending on energy levels. So,
Hmm.
if you feel like you're really tired in the morning, you probably want to eat breakfast or you want to eat when you first wake up. But if you're not and you feel like you can kind of continue that fasting period until 12 p.m., then and you're also interested in losing weight, then maybe it would be a good option for you. But again, it's so up to the individual that it's really important to work with somebody like a registered dietitian because they can help figure out if this is the right thing for you.
Exactly. And it seems like it's a very situational sort of practice in this case, depending on if you're an athlete or depending on your ultimate weight loss goals or whether it's weight gain in that case. Um,
Exactly, exactly.
One thing that's very interesting right now is considering the gyms are closed and people don't have access to the equipment they normally have access to, so they're kind of relying on taking walks, going on runs, going to the parks, finding some sort of recreational activity to maintain some physical workload throughout the day.
Hmm.
What have you found as a professional athlete to be the best way to stay fit during these times?
I'm very lucky because I played varsity volleyball up here in Canada. A lot of my friends were kin majors, and a
Hmm.
lot of them have gone on to become strength and conditioning coaches. So they already had the at-home workouts prepared, and so I just asked them, I was like, "Hey, could you send me an at-home workout?" All I have is like 10-pound dumbbells and they were
Gotcha.
able to create something for me. But there's tons of information online, lots of gyms now that are moving to online workouts, online packages that have been really beneficial for a lot of my clients.
Hmm.
I do try to get out and go for runs, but I mean it's still pretty cold up here in Toronto, so we'll see how that goes over the next few weeks.
So, is there a if someone came up to you and asked, "I'm stuck at home. I barely have any access to equipment. Maybe like you said, 10-pound dumbbells or maybe some weight bands. What would you recommend to them in terms of a simple workout or quick routine to stay physically active?"
Hmm. Okay, this is a huge secret right now that I'm telling you and all your listeners. But there's this website called Fitness Blender, and you can find it at fitnessblender.com.
Hmm.
And it's amazing. So on the homepage, there's a bunch of check boxes, and you kind of click off, what you're looking for. So whether it's high intensity cardio, or it's resistance training, anything like that. And then you can also check off what sorts of materials you have at home. And then it'll
Hmm.
just spit out a workout for you. And there's videos, and you can also put in how much time you have. So that's a huge resource that has helped so many people. And I'm sure now because everybody's at home more, they've kind of made it a lot more accessible.
Hmm. You
So
know,
that would be
I've
a really great place to start.
that is a really good suggestion. And to your other point, I've noticed a lot of gyms do this now. There's a boxing gym that I went to a few times, and what they do now is they'll do a telecommute gym session. So even if you can't really go there and box, you
Hmm.
have your bands with you, so you can just do an at-home sort of workout. But this fitness blender sounds very unique because I have a couple of bands at home. I have some very light dumbbells, like 10 pounds, maybe 15 dumbbell or 15-pound dumbbells. So this seems like something that can kind of help sustain or at least keep my activity up
Hmm.
while I'm kind of stuck at home. So that's a really good suggestion, and I'll definitely add that to the description box of the podcast for listeners out there.
Yeah, it's a really great resource. You just put in how much time you have, how many calories you want to burn, the type of training, your equipment, and it'll just spit out a workout for you. So it's really great. But I
Hmm.
do know that gyms like F45 will drop off equipment if you don't have it, so you can still do their circuit workouts.
Huh, I did not know that. It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. Are you familiar with Peloton? They are the
Yes.
ones. Yeah. So there's this thing that's been going around lately, and I hope I don't piss Peloton off with saying this, but people can supposedly order the Peloton, and you have a 30-day guarantee return policy. So people have been ordering the Peloton, having it delivered to their houses while under social distancing, using it and then returning it, and then possibly ordering another one like a month or two down the road to get away
Oh
without
my
having to pay for
goodness.
it. I
Wow.
mean, it works. I mean, I hope I don't piss them off with saying this, but
The cheat code for a healthy lifestyle.
yeah, exactly. So you're a former athlete, professional volleyball athlete, actually, and you are now a registered dietitian. So I want to ask, what are some of your biggest takeaways that have helped you become better at what you do now?
Um, Very, very loaded question. I would say, well, I mean, I've been playing volleyball since I was like 12 years old. So not playing anymore was a huge identity crisis for me. But
Mhm.
I learned so many great traits from being a student athlete like my whole life. And one of the biggest things was in undergrad, in my first and second year, I wasn't too focused on school, even though I was studying nutrition. I wasn't
Mhm.
focused enough to actually apply it to playing volleyball and being, an elite athlete. So it wasn't until third year when I started getting more serious about school that I started applying the things I was learning in my nutrition classes, particularly my sport nutrition classes. So once I understood everything about carbo loading, protein requirements, and antioxidants, supplements, all those things that are important for athletic performance, I started applying it to my volleyball career, my day to day life with training, practices, lifting, all that stuff. And I saw a major difference.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I was like, okay, there's a huge knowledge gap here because most athletes don't know that these guidelines apply.
Right. And I mean, from my own experience, I wasn't an athlete in college or in high school, but I've been working out for the better part of 10 years now. And I don't think in my experience that I've ever really have taken the use of an app or a calorie intake tool seriously.
Hmm.
I've never said to myself, you know what? I'm going to count my calories. I'm going to focus on very, very detailed meals that I'm eating throughout these years. And I've always wondered to myself, would you have noticed a big difference if you literally tracked your macros for every meal? Because for myself, I would say, well, okay, well, I'm going to make sure I intake these many meals a day. I'm going to make sure that, generally speaking, I'm eating X amount of vegetables, X amount of fruits, X amount of protein, while minimizing the amount of junk food such as ice cream or cake that I'm eating
Hmm.
in the week. And I'm thinking to myself, does it apply to both athletes and the general person who's working out? I mean, would you say to a person who's working out, yeah, you should track your calorie intake at a macro level, or does that only apply to an athlete?
So I don't necessarily think that that sort of tracking and consistently thinking so much about your food is that healthy for an individual.
Hmm.
So again, it depends on your goals. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're a rower and you're trying to switch from heavyweight to lightweight, which happens so often with especially the shorter athletes. Those are the people who really need to think about what they're eating. But then also it's important that they meet with a dietitian to make sure that it's actually feasible and healthy to hit that weight. I think it's 130 pounds or something.
Hmm.
However, for the average athlete, so these are people who are playing team sports who don't necessarily need to worry about the weight loss. And for just people who are just enjoy working out, I would never say that it's important for them to be counting their calories so strictly like that, because it gets it makes you feel a little bit obsessive, and it makes eating
Right.
really hard, and it makes it less fun. Like eating is also a social thing. It's not just fuel. It's also, it makes you feel good. Um, there's a family component to it if you eat with your family a lot. So when you're focusing on just the number, on calories, grams, everything like that, it takes away from everything else food has to offer.
I've noticed that myself, and I can fully relate. Not to say I was ever on either end of the spectrum of saying, I'm going to eat healthy all the time, or I'm just
Hmm.
going to eat junk food all the time. But there was a time where my coworkers and I would go out to lunch, for example, and they would either be eating pizza or sandwiches, and I would literally bring a box of broccoli and chicken to lunch, and it makes them think, okay, what the heck is this guy doing having the lunch eating broccoli when we're all eating pizza? So I can totally relate to that, and I kind of subscribe, at least now, to the idea of making sure I eat balanced. I can go out
Hmm.
and eat whatever I want, but weekly I'll eat healthy, and then on the weekend I will try to eat, you know, junk here and there, like either have like a dessert during the day or a cheat meal. So, I mean, is that something in your experience you would say that's okay to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's called the 5-2 ratio, where it's during the week. You're focusing mainly on a healthy diet and balanced diet, and then on the weekends, you kind of open it up a little bit. But again, at the end of the day, it all comes down to, the nutrient dense foods that you're eating. So it's really little decisions like choosing whole grain rice instead of white rice, or vegetables over just like an iceberg lettuce salad.
Hmm.
So um, it really, I think that you got it right.
Have you? I've always seen a debate on this, but do you think there's a really drastic difference between eating white rice versus brown rice?
Yes, I would say so, especially because I did quite a couple. I did one of my internship placements in a diabetes center, so all my
Hmm.
clients were diabetics, and there's so many aspects of brown rice that you're not getting from white rice. So in a diabetic, you can see that your blood sugar spikes immediately after eating white rice, whereas with brown rice, your blood sugar is a little bit more controlled, but also brown rice has a lot more fiber in it. It's got more B vitamins, certain nutrients like that you're not going to find as much of in the white rice. So same
Hmm.
goes for pasta and bread as well. So it's always better to choose the whole grain option. And sometimes they'll say, "Oh, it's whole wheat or multigrain," but you got to go
Hmm.
for the whole grain because they'll trick you.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm so used to eating white rice just because of the texture of brown rice, but wow, I might have to change that up now that I think about it. Yikes.
I mean, I don't want to make anybody feel self-conscious about their food choices, but
No. Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with
Uh,
whole grain rice. It's great.
So, a question that really gets brought up often when you're talking to any health expert that deals with diet and nutrition is, what is the difference between a dietitian and nutritionist? Because we really hear these terms interchanged more often than not.
I'm very, very happy you asked this question. So, um, the thing is, dietitians, I have an undergrad in nutrition. It's a Bachelor of Science, and I also have a master's in nutrition, a master's of health science. And I've also done an 8-month internship in various fields of nutrition to meet these competencies, they're called. And
Hmm.
then I also have to write an exam that I'm writing in November because it was postponed because of COVID. But I have to write it in November and pass this exam to be called a registered dietitian. So that's about 6 years of hoops that I've been jumping through to get this
Whoa.
title. Yeah, so the term registered dietitian is actually a protected term. So we're a healthcare professional, we're regulated. So you know that if you're going to a registered dietitian, we're held accountable, we're held to a certain standard. Whereas a nutritionist, anybody can call themselves a nutritionist. Even dietitians can call themselves nutritionists. However, it's not a regulated title, so there's less accountability. But
Mm-hmm.
I do want to point out that there are people with PhDs in nutrition who just didn't decide to complete all the hoops you need to get to become a registered dietitian, and those people also call themselves a nutritionist. There's nothing
Mm.
wrong with that because they have tons of education in nutrition. However, they just don't have the dietitian title. So dietitians can work in hospitals, we can work in diabetes centers, public health, but a nutritionist wouldn't necessarily get those positions in those settings because it's not regulated.
So, what about those people who are either just general athletes or bodybuilders who
Hmm.
post on their profile or website, yeah, I'm an athlete and I am a nutrition consultant?
Yes,
Do
that
you think that's
grinds
kind
my
of
gears.
stretching the truth?
Definitely, because there's so the another main thing about a registered dietitian is that we're extremely evidence-based. Like nothing comes out of my mouth unless I've researched it extensively, if I've looked at the clinical practice guidelines. However, if you don't have the background in nutrition and you're calling yourself a nutrition consultant or a nutritionist, but you've only taken like a 1 year course, you there's there's just certain you wouldn't come to the same conclusions as me, and I'm not saying you 100% wouldn't, but it the way we get our information might be completely different.
Hmm.
And we're also trained in medical nutrition therapy, so this is for dealing with things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension. Whereas if you're a former athlete and you're dealing with an athlete who has type 1 diabetes, how would you know that you are, you know, making sure that they're eating healthy, eating for performance, but also doing it safely to maintain their blood sugar levels so they don't have a hypoglycemic episode?
Hmm. That's one of the challenges I've noticed with seeing people post these on their websites because in a sense it's untruthful and it
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't do anyone justice when they
Mm-hmm.
have underlying health conditions they need to be considerate of. And you often hear the term bro science out there where
Yeah.
it's crazy because people will spew what they personally think is healthy or beneficial when in reality it's very biased or misconstrued towards a certain point of view in that case.
Hmm. And a lot of it is just based on their own personal experience and what's worked for them, which is everybody's so different. It's not going to work for everybody else. So it
Hmm.
needs to be 100% evidence-based. And the term registered dietitian is to protect the public. Like we go through all of these hoops just to make sure that the public is protected and they're getting the best evidence out there for that specific individual.
Hmm. So you're basically, in a sense, under oath to make sure that the quality of service and healthcare you're providing is in the best interest of your clients, so to speak.
Yes, 100%. All of my posts, everything I put out into the world has been researched, and I make sure that I'm not putting out anything that's going to get my license stripped, pretty much.
So I was having this conversation with my brother the other day, and he is a nurse, uh, working in a city nearby myself.
Hmm.
And I was asking him his thoughts on the whole social distancing thing and seeing what his questions would have been to you. And one thing he brought up was, do you find value in herbal supplements such as echinacea on immune system support when people are, again, social distancing and they're trying to keep a healthy body, making sure their immune system is able to sustain, the negative impacts of this current virus or even the flu or cold?
So, with herbal supplements like that, the evidence just is not robust enough for us to make a blanket statement like, yes, this will
Hmm.
definitely help you. But I usually just say there's certain nutrients that are important to the immune system, vitamins and minerals alike, like um, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, iron. All those things kind of support the immune system, and you can get
Right.
all of that from food. So that's my general statement. However, If you want to try something like a supplement and see what happens, then
Hmm.
I'm not going to stop you from that. But also, if you have financial constraints, and you're spending so much money on, vitamin C pills or echinacea, ginger, garlic, those things, I would just say, you can get this in your food. Don't
Hmm.
stress yourself out. And also, there's no vitamin C in the stores right now.
So, not to put pharmaceuticals on the spot here or put myself in a deeper hole than I already did with Peloton, but are you telling me that from your experience or knowledge that supplements that you can get in the store for vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin K, so on and so forth aren't necessary because you can already get that in your food?
100%. The only times that they've seen that supplementing with certain vitamins, or maybe not the only time, but in general, the only times that they've seen um, it make a positive effect on their immune system from taking supplements is when the individual was already deficient in these certain vitamins or minerals.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
Well,
these vitamins are pretty abundant in food. So if you're just eating a balanced diet, as we mentioned before, you should be, covering all your bases.
on the front of diet and nutrition, are there foods that you kind of recommend people avoid, or do you believe it's better to follow just an everything in moderation approach? So, for example, if I'm just waking up one day and I decide to eat a healthy breakfast, a healthy lunch, and then kind of mix it up for like junk food during dinner and then a snack at night versus eating all healthy and avoiding junk food throughout the day. Is there really one that's more optimal to pursue than the other?
That's a good question. I think throughout our days, we have about five or so opportunities to optimize our health. And I think if often than not, you're choosing the healthier choice, so more fruits and vegetables, then you should be okay.
You say there's five opportunities. What is that? What do you mean by that?
So you have, well, most people will have their three meals, and then some other people will have two snacks in between meals, and then something before bed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually ends up being five eating opportunities. And with
I
those
see.
opportunities, you can either really truly nourish yourself, or you can kind of take away from that.
What if someone wants to just front load or back load all their meals? So, for example, I don't want to take 3 to 5 meals in a day, so I'm going to eat two very nutritionally dense meals, one in the morning and one at night. Is there a negative impact versus someone eating 5 meals or eating 2 meals like that?
From the research that I've seen, it's mostly equivocal. So it really just depends on the person. There hasn't really been evidence that says you need to eat this many meals a day. Um, but I mean, your body pretty much knows how much it needs to be eating. So I think it does a pretty good job at regulating that. So whether you're just used to eating 2 meals a day or you're used to eating 3 meals and two snacks or 4 meals, whatever it is, your body can kind of regulate that. However,
Hmm.
if you do find like, you're losing weight unintentionally, then there's a problem going on.
Right, right, right. Um, Interesting side note to that. There was this, I guess there's research out there saying that you should drink 8 cups of water a day, or I think it's a gallon or more a day. And from my understanding, that's a very olden approach
Hmm.
to looking at how to satiate yourself with water throughout the day. And the real science behind it is that you should really just drink water whenever you're thirsty. Is that something you kind of found to be true, or do you take the approach of, well, you should drink X amount of cups of water a day?
There's two ways to look at it. So in clinical nutrition, your water requirements come from your calorie requirements. So it's typically 1 milliliter of water per calories. And if most people
Mm-hmm.
need about 2,000 calories a day, that's 2 liters of water. But you can get water from foods and beverages. So it's important to take that into consideration as well. But for my athletes, where hydration is extremely important, I don't tell them any specific number. I say you need to drink with all of your meals, drink during timeouts or drill breaks, and then
Right.
also eat wet foods. So these are foods that have water incorporated within them. So these are, again, fruits and vegetables. And then also foods that absorb water when they're cooking. So rice and pasta,
Hmm.
even yogurt is considered a wet food, soup, things like that. So it's not about, eating 8 cups every day. You're also getting liquids from your food. Even tea and coffee counts. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I can see that because a lot of people eat fruits and vegetables throughout the day, and those are very dense or concentrated with water. I mean, they're most likely mostly water. So I think people tend to mistake that, or at least ignore the fact that they're already consuming water by
Yeah.
eating vegetables.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of people are like, I don't drink water, but then they're drinking, lots of Diet Coke, which is also a liquid. I mean, I don't recommend it, but but that's still a liquid. They're still hydrating.
On that note of eating or drinking Diet Coke, are any drinks such as Gatorade really beneficial for the general person or athlete out there?
For the general person, I'd never recommend Gatorade because that's for athletes who are expending tons of energy throughout the day. So Gatorade has lots of sugar in it, which we know. That's because athletes need carbohydrates and quick dissolving carbohydrates while they're doing their sport. However, for the individual, it's not who's not exercising at that intensity. It's not recommended because it's just extra calories and you don't need it.
So for the people out there who go to the gym and drink a Bang, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there's this energy drink out there called a Bang
Okay.
Energy. Are you saying you wouldn't recommend drinking an energy drink prior to going to the gym for a heavy lifting session?
Oh, is that similar to like a Red Bull or
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, it's similar to it, but it's usually promotes the idea. Oh, it's good as pre-workout for the gym or
Hmm.
something.
Okay, I'm Googling it now. It says it's a stimulant, it contains stimulants, usually caffeine. So the thing with caffeine is everybody metabolizes it differently. However, this also has taurine in it and certain amino acids and lots of sugar and sweeteners. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, especially if you're prone to anxiety or you have any heart problems
Hmm.
for those reasons exactly. But um, if that's what you need to get you through your workout and you've been doing it consistently, then I mean, that's what might work for you. However, it just seems a little bit unnecessary in my opinion. You don't want to drink a drink that's got extra calories in it because you could really just satisfy your calorie need by eating a snack. You could have fruits and
Hmm.
vegetables or like a banana or something instead of getting it from this energy drink.
I fully agree on that. That's the kind of the approach I took when I was working out while I was in college. I would always just make sure right before I work out, I ate some form of carbs to give me that energy,
Mhm.
and then the same thing after the fact when I got home, either a protein shake followed by some form of carbs, rather than kind of focus on taking Gatorade or an energy drink to kind of sustain me throughout that workout and either pre or post workout.
Yeah, and if you need a major stimulant like this, it's might be because you're not eating enough throughout the rest of the day, so you're feeling tired when you're going into your workout.
Hmm.
However, for Gatorade, I don't even recommend it for team sports usually, except maybe like hockey, basketball. Volleyball, I wouldn't recommend it because they only last about 90 minutes and you don't really need that much carbohydrates when you're
Hmm.
in a 90-minute match.
But isn't volleyball still considered to be a pretty intensive sport? I mean, I've never personally played it professionally, but I've played it here and there. And I think people are moving around quite a lot when they're playing that sport.
Yeah, like it's definitely high intensity stop and go sport, but you're for the most part you're staying within the same 9 meter box. You're not running
Hmm.
lines like you are in basketball or soccer. So I mean, usually you can get the carbohydrates you need if you need them from bench snacks like oranges or pretzels or something like that. We used to keep energy bars on the, or not energy bars, but like chewy bars on the bench.
Hmm. Do you find protein bars to be a adequate resource for carbs and protein, or is there just too much sugar typically in protein bars to be kind of a viable meal?
Um, Protein bars can definitely work after your workout if you don't have, like, say you have a workout and then you have class right afterwards and you don't
Hmm.
have time to make a meal, then a protein bar would be a really great option. Even a protein shake would be a good option. But after you're working out, you want to replenish your carbohydrates and you want to get protein in. So if these protein bars have carbohydrates, that's great.
Okay, because I would typically eat these after my workouts sometimes, and I'd always like have this discussion with people, and they would always say, "Wow, well, there's like so much sugar in these protein bars that it's pretty much as if you're eating like a Snickers bar or a candy bar." And I'm like, technically, I guess, but like I've never done enough research to really assess whether or not it's bad for you. But I enjoy them; they work for me. I guess in that case, I tend to lean on the side of, well, if it works for you, it works for you.
Exactly. A lot of it is trial and error.
An interesting question that was really brought up to me was that there are research articles linking eating a low calorie diet and intermittent fasting on aging and cancer. Do you find there to be a link between those?
I haven't seen any of the evidence yet because a lot of my clients are young and athletes, so intermittent fasting really isn't on my radar, unfortunately. But I can definitely look into it and shoot you an email after this.
Yeah, it's awesome. In terms of people or your clients that you work with, what would you say are some of the largest pitfalls you see with people and meeting their dietary goals? And what are some ways you would suggest overcoming these?
Um, a lot of the time it's breakfast. So, during one of my internships in Ottawa, I worked with a varsity women's hockey team.
Hmm.
So, ages 18 to 22, some of them were a little older because they came from Quebec. So, ages 18 to 22, they're busy athletes, full course load and hockey, which is probably 5 days a week, plus games on the weekend. And the biggest thing that when I was doing my initial assessment for all of them, the one thing that they told me was that they never ate breakfast because they were too busy or like they woke up too late. And that was definitely the biggest thing that would affect their performance. But also, another thing that they told me was that a lot of them don't eat legumes, which are chickpeas, lentils, and beans. Again, my favorite, the perfect food for an athlete.
Why legumes of all foods?
They're they're really good for you because they're packed with nutrients. Again,
Hmm.
iron, protein, carbohydrates, but also for the athlete, carbohydrates and protein are so important to your energy levels, and your glycogen storage, which are how many carbs you can store in your body, and also your protein. So this is important for muscle building. So carbohydrates and protein, you're getting this from this tiny bean, and you don't even need that many beans to meet your carbohydrate needs. So it just seems like you're really, oh, and they're cheap. So it
So
just
this is
seems like the perfect food to eat for an athlete.
so even outside of being an athlete, would you recommend this as a food for somebody that works in an office
Hmm.
and is snacking throughout the day but doesn't want to eat very dense food that's going to make them fall asleep while working?
Yeah, so again, with legumes, like chickpeas are very filling as well because they have fiber in them. So they're
Hmm.
filling as well. Um, and you can just roast them with some spices and you can eat them kind of like popcorn almost,
Hmm.
but it's going to fill you up and provide more nutrients than a bowl of popcorn would. So I definitely would recommend it if you're in an office. They're low calorie. Um, I really can't say anything more about them because they're just fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give that a try since I personally have never tried baking or cooking legumes or chickpeas in such a way. So I'm gonna have to give it a try
Yeah,
for
actually, I have a
snacking.
really good recipe for it. I'll send that to you as well.
Awesome,
But
because I'll also add that in the description of the podcast as well for listeners out there who are interested.
yeah, it sounds good. Also, fun fact, I think it was 2016 was the year of the pulse, or it might have been
Ye-
2018. I'm not
Year of
sure.
the Pulse.
Yeah, so the year of the pulse beans, like pulse are like those are like beans as well. I think they're the
Hmm.
dried version. So because they're just
I,
really good for you. So
I never heard of that before. Year Pulse, huh?
yeah, just dietitian things. We know
Yeah,
these things.
I'm gonna have to look that up after this. So you mentioned briefly a moment ago talking about intermittent fasting and how people say that one of their biggest pitfalls is the fact that they don't eat breakfast.
Hmm.
Now, I've known people and had friends who would say, you know what, I'm not going to eat breakfast because I need to make sure I fast from 8 o'clock at night to 12 o'clock the next day. And all they would do is have something called bulletproof coffee in the morning, which I believe is coffee, coconut milk, and well, maybe it's MCT oil from coconuts,
Yeah.
and something else. And they would say, this is what's supposed to sustain me, and I get the rest of my caloric intake throughout the day. And mind you, this person is extremely fit and just he looks like a bodybuilder. And I'm thinking to myself, well,
Hmm.
how does someone really sustain themselves like that? And is there really any negative downside to following a diet like that? Because people follow diets like keto, they follow paleo, vegan, you name it. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, these are in a sense all fads, but people follow them with some semblance of results.
Yeah, yeah. So weight loss is usually the one that people are going after. Um, and with the bulletproof coffee or things like the keto diet, you're going to see results because there's a calorie deficit there. You're going to see results because you're just drinking coffee in the morning instead of eating breakfast. So you're creating calorie deficit. From the keto diet, you're going to get results because you're just eating less calories because there's not much you can eat that doesn't have carbs in it.
Hmm.
So this is where people are seeing the results. However, a keto diet is not something that's sustainable. Neither is, well, it really depends on the person, but for the most part, most people can't sustain a keto diet. They can't sustain the paleo diet because it's also very very low in carbohydrates as well. But if you can sustain it, then continue. Just keep doing what you're doing. If you can't
Hmm.
sustain it, then that's when you got to start looking at other options or meeting with a dietitian to create guidelines that you can stick to for the rest of your life.
You mentioned keto diet not being sustainable.
Hmm.
And I actually have a book downstairs on keto meals. Not personally a fan of it. My girlfriend has always tried to get me more into it. I know supposedly it's a high fat, and correct me if I'm wrong on here. I believe it's high fat, high protein, low carb diet. What are the reasons that you see it not being beneficial in the long term for some people?
So are you referring to the general population or athletes?
General population in this
Okay.
case.
Yeah, so there has been research showing that following a keto diet, because it's higher in fat, it affects your triglyceride levels, your cholesterol levels, worse than if you're just following a regular standard healthy diet. So that's one thing. Another thing is you can have major micronutrient deficiencies that you're not aware of just because there's
Hmm.
carbohydrates are nutrient dense as well, especially whole grains because they contain B vitamins, iron, and other things that you're not going to get from a high fat diet. Although you could definitely get iron from your food and stuff. But for the most part, you could end up with a micronutrient deficiency without even knowing it. So that's another problem. Lastly, the sustainability factor is when you're out to eat with your friends and family, how do you how do you get anything on the menu?
Right. It's tough to, I imagine.
Yeah, so that's another thing because food is very social as well, right? So
Hmm.
it's important that this is something that you can stick to for the rest of your life, whether you're doing it out in public or in your own home by yourself.
I know we kind of focused a lot on general population and people who are involved with athletics, but I have to ask for people that deal with conditions such as hypothyroidism, for example,
Hmm.
what kind of diet would you really recommend for them?
Um, Typically for individuals with hypothyroidism, as soon as they start taking the medications and their thyroid mechanisms go back to normal, they can just follow a normal diet, maybe focus on their salt intake a little bit more and making sure that it's under um, the recommendations or the upper
Hmm.
level, sorry. But for the most part, their thyroid function goes back to normal, so they don't really need to worry about the foods that they're eating as much as they would if they weren't taking the medications.
So they can continue to really just eat what they're normally eating on a day to day basis, essentially.
Yes, however, hypothyroidism is associated with increased weight gain because
Hmm.
it slows down your metabolism. So maybe you'd want to consider if if it was something that you were interested in, focusing on healthy eating guidelines that help lower your weight just to reduce the onset of chronic conditions.
Hmm. So in college, you were, of course, an athlete. You have played a lot of volleyball during your time in university, and now one of your focuses as a registered dietitian is on helping athletes maintain their diets or to create diets that and help ultimately improve their performance. So, what would you say are the staples to a diet revolving around athletics? Does it differ from person to person, or would you say there's a staple of foods that you would recommend any athlete to eat?
I'm gonna go with legumes again. Definitely one that you want to make sure that you're adding to your diet. But for at the end of the day, sports nutrition is very, there's so much new research coming out all the time, especially because supplements are a huge industry as well. There's tons of research out there, and it's always constantly evolving. Um, However, it always comes down to hydration. So making sure that you're drinking enough water through the day and throughout your exercise to make sure you're not getting dehydrated. And then also meeting your carbohydrate intake so you have enough energy to do your, not just your practices, but also just to sustain your daily living activities. And then also your protein requirements to make sure that you're maintaining your muscle mass, because that's really important for athletic performance. And then
Mm,
finally, your overall caloric intake. So the amount of calories that you're eating, you need to make sure that it's enough to sustain your practices, training, and games, but then also sustain your daily activities of living.
hmm.
Because a calorie deficit is probably the worst thing for an athlete to have, because you can um, end up with higher risk for injury. There's reproductive malfunctions that can happen, and then also bone problems can happen, and then, of course, decreased athletic performance.
You know, it's crazy you mentioned this, and I'm actually looking it up right now. But one of the craziest things I heard was that Michael Phelps, who is the professional swimmer, he intakes 12,000 calories in a single day. And I'm thinking to myself, at my peak, when I was working out pretty intense in college, I was probably intaking around maybe 3,500 to 4,000 calories. But for an athlete to intake 12,000 calories a day, do you find that to be sustainable or even healthy to do, even if they're really, really intense with their workout efforts throughout the week?
Yeah, that is a lot of calories. I would need to know like his height, weight, um, muscle mass,
It's
and
all from
like,
legumes, probably.
yeah, exactly. I'm just like, that is so many calories. Because like 4,000, 5,000 calories is pretty standard for like a typical like 220-pound 6'2" male.
Hmm.
But 12,000, that's a lot. But also if he's practicing 3 times a day for long periods of time, then that also makes sense because that adds to your calories out.
Yeah, and I've heard swimming can probably burn more calories than running in some cases because it's full body as opposed to just running with your legs. I mean, again, I could be wrong. You're probably swinging your arms when you're running and you're probably burning calories through that. But I've heard swimming can be pretty intensive when it comes to being a physical activity for weight loss.
Yeah, I'm assuming that is also correct. Haven't looked into it,
Hmm.
disclosure, but I mean, it also depends on the intensity and the duration of the exercise.
Hmm.
So, I guess if you're running slowly for 10K, but and then you're going and swimming a lot faster for 10K,
Hmm.
then swimming would definitely be expend more energy.
We talked briefly on this earlier in the conversation in regards to kind of being on the spectrum of how you eat. And when I say that, I mean some people might say, I'm going to eat healthy throughout the week,
Hmm.
no cheat meals, no diets. The other person will say, you know what, I'm just going to eat whatever I want, whether it be junk food, but I'm going to work out with an extreme intensity to make sure that I am not gaining more weight than I am muscle. And then you, of course, have the people out there to say, you know, I'm going to be balanced about what I eat. I'm going to eat healthy, but I'm going to have a cheat meal at the end of the week or throughout the week to kind of make sure that I'm not teetering to one extreme, so to speak. So, if someone wanted to eat sweets without feeling guilty, are there any recommended alternatives?
Um, well, I don't think that food should necessarily make you feel guilty about eating it, especially now there's a health at every size movement for people who are in bigger bodies. There's a lot of problems when they're eating food because their confidence has been crushed by people being fat phobic. And
Hmm.
so there's just lots of layers there when it comes to eating food that you like and that makes you feel good when you eat it. So one thing is chocolate. Um, so I'd say if you want to eat the chocolate, go and eat the chocolate. Just don't eat 20 chocolates. But if you're looking for healthier snack alternatives, like me, I'll eat my 3 meals and then I'll snack throughout the entire day. Doesn't matter what it is, but I always make sure that it's something a little bit on the healthier side. So because I snack a lot, I feel like I should be having some healthier snacks sometimes.
Hmm.
So I'll go for frozen grapes, frozen strawberries, or frozen mangoes and just kind of eat those like candy. They're very good.
You brought up chocolate,
Hmm.
and dark chocolate is probably one of my favorite things to eat as a semi sweet, I guess, so to
Yeah.
speak. But I want to really dispel this here and now because I've had conversations with friends about dark chocolate and how there's a huge misconception with it being healthy for people to eat. And there's been articles in the past saying, yeah, dark chocolate's considered a health food and that you shouldn't feel bad about eating it as an alternative to other junk food. Is that something you would agree with, or has there been evidence out there to show that dark chocolate isn't as necessarily not beneficial, so to speak, but kind of one of the lesser evils when it comes to sweets?
So with anything, it's kind of about, for lack of a better word, choices. So when you're choosing your snack, if you have caramel in the cupboard and you have dark chocolate in the cupboard, I would recommend to have the dark chocolate, but also again, everything in moderation. So don't sit there and eat the entire chocolate bar. But if you want to have 2 pieces of chocolate every day, then that's perfectly fine. Or if you want to
Hmm.
save the chocolate for the weekend, that's perfectly fine as well. But again, with anything, if you eat too much of it, it's not going to be beneficial. But chocolate does have, dark chocolate specifically, depending on what percentage, it does, there has been evidence that it's got antioxidants in it, it's anti-inflammatory, things like that, but I wouldn't label it a health food. I wouldn't hold
Hmm.
it to the same standard as a fruit or vegetable or legume
Right.
or a whole grain.
I like how you mentioned moderation. I personally subscribe to that sort of a philosophy where it's best to eat everything in moderation
Hmm.
and make sure you kind of sustain a balanced diet. Don't go overboard on or to one extreme eating certain foods, and don't go to extreme of eating no foods. I think it's important to just be cognizant of what you're eating, but to
Hmm.
be really balanced and eating it in moderation. I mean, don't go out and just eat a whole carton of ice cream. I mean, eat half the carton of ice cream maybe, or a quarter of a bag of chips. I don't know. I'm just giving you notional examples here, but I hear so many cases of people kind of falling on one end of the extreme or other when it comes to their dietary needs or nutritional needs in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. And that is, not only is it going to nourish you physically, but also psychologically, and the psychological aspect of food, that's probably the healthiest way to do it.
One thing I've really noticed, and I've had conversations with people about this, and they told me to ask you about it, is that is that many people struggle with putting on weight regardless of how much they eat. Is
Hmm.
there a typical cause for this, such as high metabolism? And regardless if there is or isn't, what would you suggest to them so they can put on more weight?
So, yeah, everybody's metabolism is different. Like maybe you're eating a lot more, but then you're also going and working out that those days that you eat more, so it kind of balances out. But a lot of there are a lot of healthy foods out there that are very calorie dense. So when I tell my athletes, or the guidelines I give my athletes when they want to gain weight is, add a smoothie to your day.
Hmm.
Try to find extra ways that you can add calories into food. So if you have oatmeal in the morning, just oatmeal and some berries, add in like 2 scoops of peanut butter, add in protein powder. Do the things that you can to make sure that you're adding the healthy fats in,
Hmm.
because fat is higher. in calories than protein and carbohydrates. So for every gram of fat, you're getting double the amount of calories as you would in a gram of carbohydrates. So I say add peanut butter to everything. Try to eat avocado as much as possible. Try to use oil more when you're cooking things. So it's really, there's a bunch of guidelines, but if you are trying to gain weight and you don't know where to start with a smoothie with some peanut butter in it and go from
Hmm.
there.
I think that's the one of the things I've noticed most about people who try to put on weight. They'll take a blender and they would dump. I'm just giving an example here. It could be completely wrong, but they'll just dump oats in there. They would dump spinach in there, maybe eggs, whey protein, and some other stuff. And that tends to be. I'm not saying it sounds pretty disgusting to drink that specifically.
Wait, they put
but
eggs in it?
Eggs, spinach, oats, and peanut butter. I'm just giving you a rough example here, but my point is people can probably put on more calories or intake more calories through a single smoothie like that than if they were just to try to eat like a simple meal of eggs and a cup of oatmeal or something. I
Yeah.
think it's a way better way of doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, there's a huge smoothie fad or people drinking their vegetables like celery juice. And it's like, if your goal is to lose weight and you're drinking your calories, that's not a good place to start because it doesn't fill you up as much as the real food would. So
Really?
yeah, if you're if
What's the
you're
reason for
eating
that?
well, the real food. So say you're drinking celery juice. I have
Hmm.
a big problem with celery juice first of all. So if you're drinking celery juice, um, you're not getting any of the fiber that comes from the actual celery vegetable. So fiber is the thing that fills you up because your body can't really digest it that well.
Hmm.
So you want to be getting all that fiber. You don't want to be losing it when you're juicing the vegetable because that's
So
going to
those
fill you up.
right. So those 30-day juice fads aren't really good for you.
No, not at all. Not at all. And those, again, those aren't sustainable. You can't do that for the rest of your life. You might lose weight, but you'll likely gain it back after you're done
Huh.
that.
Wow. Well, that's good to hear for listeners out there, probably, since it's a very popular thing nowadays amongst
Yeah,
people.
it is. Even my mom does, she does the isogenics one.
Hmm.
And I'm like, there are so many things in your everyday diet that you could change easily to make sure that you're getting the same results in the long
Hmm.
run and you can sustain these for the rest of your life.
But that's the thing, though, because people always seem to want the easy way out when it comes to health and dieting. People don't want to put in the work to lose weight. They'll say, what's the easiest way I can lose weight? Maybe I'll put on a weight belt. Not a weight belt, but there's like these belts you put on your stomach and they vibrate or something. Maybe I'll just do a juice cleanse for 30 days or not eat. And it's so common for people to look at what are the best dietary supplements to lose weight
Mm-hmm.
rather than just taking the approach of calories in, calories out, supplemented with some form of exercise.
Yes,
It's that simple, really.
it is. It is that simple, but it's a lot of work. And that's why I say, like, there's no finish line for this.
Hmm.
When you're starting with me and you're trying to lose weight, these are just things that you can keep up with for the rest of your life. And the first thing I say is make half your plate veggies. That's what's going to get you there. And for the most part, it works.
Hmm. I think it is. I mean, honestly, just having a little bit of vegetables in your day to day life or even fruit, it's just starting off with that. Maybe even just if you're eating 3 cookies a day, eat 2 cookies a day. It's kind of the small steps, really. It's not telling somebody to stop
Mm.
what they're doing. It's just taking baby steps in one direction to kind of create those positive habits that can grow over time in a positive direction, really.
Yes, 100%. And like some of my athletes are like, I hate vegetables. I don't like this. I don't like that. But then for the hockey team, I did a workshop with them. We had a couple picky eaters. However, we'd make
Hmm.
like bean salads. We made this really great mango chip dip, and they loved it. And I was like, "Hey, you're eating a bean right now."
That's very interesting. I've never heard of mango chip dip. Huh.
It's amazing. I'll send you the recipe. It's such a huge party favorite.
Huh. All right. Sounds really good, actually. Uh, you on the topic of athletics still. one of the major focuses in nutrition is on genetics.
Hmm.
And there's always this question on some people having a notably improved response to diets than other people. Is this something you've noticed in your own experience?
Um, there's a whole field of nutrition called nutrigenomics or nutrition, nu, nu, something with nutrition and
Right.
your genes. Nutrigenomics. I don't. I can't pronounce it. Anyways, and this tells you it's very, very fresh. So it takes your genetic code and it tells you which diets would work best for you if you're trying to lose weight or which foods to avoid. There's also information on if caffeine's going to affect you more than it would affect somebody
Hmm.
else based on your genetic code. So it's really, really cool. However, I don't have much experience in it, so it's very new. So I also don't know how robust the evidence is to be personalizing a diet to somebody to that extent. However, some people have seen great results with it.
Mm.
But I do think that's definitely in the future. That's going to be a big game changer.
I was actually going to ask you this as a follow-up question, ironically enough, because there's all these different tests you can take, like 23andMe, for example.
Hmm.
Well, where they'll customize your diets or tell you what foods you should be eating or shouldn't be eating. I was going to ask if there was any efficacy in online genetic tests that provide individual dietary recommendations based off your genetic code.
So with those sorts of tests, you always want to make sure that you're meeting with a registered dietitian just to make sure that they're taking into consideration everything about you. So not just your genetic code, but also your pre-existing medical conditions, your family
Hmm.
history's medical conditions, your lifestyle. Because if you send in something online and they tell you, oh, well, you should be eating this, this, and this, but what if you're allergic to one of those items? Then what?
Right.
And you just kind of wasted your money.
Right.
So you want to get
Because
the
they're
whole look.
expensive.
Yes, they
Hmm.
are expensive. So you do want to get kind of um, a whole picture.
In terms of athletes you've worked with, um, have you found there to be any recommendations on certain foods that shorten recovery times post workout?
Yeah, so the whole idea of recovery nutrition is to reduce recovery time, and
Hmm.
that is from, well, mainly it's from drink rehydrating, so with water, making sure that you're rehydrated for your next training session,
Hmm.
and also carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen stores to make sure that you have enough energy to play well at your next training session, game, whatever it is. And then protein is a little bit different because the recovery session goes on for at least 24 hours. So eating protein isn't really going to, it's not going to do much if you have two training sessions in one day. However, the training session after that, you might see some not performance enhancements, but you might get increased muscle protein synthesis. So those are your gains.
Huh. So I see a lot of advertisements for things. They're BCAAs, branched chain amino acids,
Hmm.
and they're typically highly touted as being the best method for recovery post workout. Is that something you found to be true?
1 second. I'm just gonna pull up my protein sheet here
All right.
because I just revamped all of my recommendations
Mm-hmm.
for this, and BCAAs was something that I was looking into. Sorry, you might have to cut this part out if you're editing
No
it.
worries. Yeah.
1 sec. Okay, so with BCAAs, the evidence again is pretty equivocal. They've seen that whey protein, or just from eating a whole protein source, has
Mm-hmm.
a lot more robust increase in your muscle protein synthesis, especially if you're restricting energy. It might be best to just go with a whey protein powder or just some sort of protein food that has all of the essential amino acids in it. BCAAs also can compete for certain protein receptors. So leucine is the big amino acid, which is helpful for muscle protein synthesis or your gains. However, it's a branched chain amino acid along with three other branched chain amino acids, and they all kind of fight for the same protein receptor or transporter.
Really?
Yes. Um, but again, the research is not robust enough to kind of make like a yes or no answer.
Hmm.
So try it, but also don't waste your money.
I know that like supplements are kind of contentious. It's a very contentious topic considering that the FDA doesn't regulate supplements.
Hmm.
So, considering that, I mean, do you have any recommendation in selecting a supplement that is pure and safe, or that is something you would actually recommend purchasing in terms of for benefits?
Yeah, so for athletes, you're 100% responsible for everything that you put into your body, regardless if you know you're you're consuming an illegal substance or not. You're
Hmm.
still responsible for it if you test positive for it. So, with that being said, you're never going to be 100% certain that a supplement you're taking is not contaminated with an illegal substance. You're just never going to know. However, there have been third party certification programs put in place to make this risk a little less for athletes. So these are things like the Informed Sport certificate or the NSF sticker, which you'll see on the supplement containers. These have
Hmm.
been, um, I guess, certified by a third party to make sure that the manufacturer is following specific standards to make sure that these aren't illegal substances going into it. However, you're still not going to be 100% sure, but it does minimize the risk that you're going to be unknowingly consuming an illegal substance.
Mm. I noticed there's one certification that is on a protein powder that I myself is I'm pretty fond of, and that's the Now Brands protein powder. But the certification associated with that is the GMP certification. I think it's called, yeah, it's Good Manufacturing Practice,
Mm-hmm.
and it just required in order to conform to the guidelines recommended by agencies that control the authorization and manufacturing of food and beverages for, I guess, pharmaceutical products and whatnot. But I've noticed those being placed a lot on different uh, physical supplements. So, I mean, if that's the case, like, do you see there being any validity behind those? And even going a bit further than that, if you were to recommend any supplements to your athletes or to anybody in general, what would those be?
Um, hmm. Well, with those third party certifications like the GMP, the ISO, NSF, these are things that help minimize the risk. However, with athletes, I mean, lots of athletes take protein powders just because it fits in with their schedule well and it makes it a lot easier to meet their protein requirements.
Hmm.
So I'd never say don't take a supplement, but I always recommend the food first approach. However, if it fits in with your lifestyle, then definitely you that's something we can look into. But
Hmm.
if you just need to make sure that they have that certification on it, where a third party has said that this they use good manufacturing practices.
One of the most common supplement, at least I hear people take, and I've taken this in the past, but I've noticed like some negative side effects with headaches, was creatine,
Hmm.
and supposedly it just fills your muscles with water. Um, what are your thoughts on taking it? And for those that out there that do take it, do you recommend people cycle it or take it continuously?
So with creatine, it definitely works. Definitely does what it needs to do as an ergogenic aid. And the headaches, yeah, definitely that could happen because you're just either you could be dehydrated or it just puts so much water into your body that you're not used to it.
Hmm.
So with creatine, I would definitely recommend the cycling with it because your body makes creatine as well. So you want to make sure that this mechanism still does its job even while
Hmm.
you're taking the creatine supplement. So you want to cycle it just to make sure that your body can still create its own
Hmm.
without the
I
supplement.
see.
Yeah.
Is that something people can also get strictly from eating food, or is that a supplement that you would have to take via powder?
People can get it from animal products.
Hmm.
Vegetarians are at a little bit of a disadvantage because of that, but because your body can make it, I don't think all athletes need to take it. But for volleyball players, it might be something that they can look into.
Have you noticed a big difference between athletes who are carnivores and those who are vegetarian in terms of their diets? Because there are athletes I've seen out there in the NFL, for example, who are pure vegetarians
Hmm.
and they perform just as high at a level as those who aren't vegetarians. So, I mean, is that kind of like a tough thing to kind of work with, or have you noticed that being a vegetarian is still possible while being an athlete?
It's definitely still possible, and lots of people have gone plant-based or vegan because of the Game Changers documentary. Um,
Yep,
but
yep.
it's definitely still possible. I wouldn't say that it's any better or any worse than a regular omnivore diet. But it is definitely doable as long as you're working with a dietitian to make sure that you're meeting all of your micronutrient needs and you're also meeting your protein needs and your carbohydrate needs adequately, then there shouldn't be a problem there.
So this question is not diet related, but seeing as you are a former athlete, and this question could probably be answered just based off anybody's preference, I suppose. But would you say that there's an optimal routine for any athlete out there, whether it be functional workouts, CrossFit, yoga, or any other form of training that you can imagine?
Hmm. Well, a lot of my training honestly was not my choice. So
Hmm.
it was just what the coaches would put up on the board for us, and we'd go and do
Right.
that specific workout. However, I did do a lot of yoga and flexibility work when I was in university, and I still do it now. But I mean, I'm not flexible by any means. But I definitely did notice that it would help, even if it was just to make me less anxious and nervous on the court
Hmm.
from doing things like yoga. That was definitely helpful. But for the most part, if you're in a sport like volleyball where it's very based on it's stop and go sport, jumping is a huge part of it, then definitely resistance training is what's going to help you get better.
Mm. Do you think people out there tend to focus strictly on one form of training as opposed to finding a balance? I know you mentioned yoga as something you took part in, and I hear a lot about athletes who will do, I guess, weight training, for example, but they would also supplement that with some form of a stretching routine or some form of a yoga based routine just to make sure that there is that balance in how they manage their body, because you don't want to be too strenuous by overloading the body with weights,
Hmm.
but you also want to supplement it with, stretching or something that relaxes the body really.
So with exercise, it's quite out of my scope because I'm mainly nutrition focused.
Hmm.
However, with exercise, like when I was, this can definitely be from my athlete point of view. Um, I when I was in the off season, I wasn't too worried about resistance training, getting stronger, all that stuff. Although I think most athletes would disagree with me on that. For me, it's all about like what moves you and what you enjoy.
Hmm.
Because why am I going to drag myself to the gym if I don't like it when
Right.
I can go for a run here and be and feel better about my day? Because
Hmm.
I like to think of exercises more, it has more psychological benefits for me. Like I wouldn't do it for the physical benefits per se. I do it more for the psychological benefits, um, in terms of being able to focus more, feeling more alert, things like that. I value that a lot more than physical.
Hmm.
So for me, it's just about what I enjoy and makes me feel good.
Right. And I mean, from my own perspective, since you mentioned it, um, the reason I personally got into working out was to find a way to clear my head
Mm-hmm.
and to use as kind of that escape. And over time, it became a hybrid for something to use as a relaxant, so to speak, because when you're working out, whatever, depending on whatever form of workout you're doing, it helps to clear the mind, to become more relaxed. Your mind isn't as distracted by other things going on at that point in time. And I guess it's a dual purpose, so to speak, because not only are you kind of de stressing, but it really helps to stimulate the body. You're, building muscle, or I guess becoming more limber. I mean,
Yeah.
people work out for various reasons, but ultimately, working out can have a multi purpose rather than saying, yeah, I'm going to become some jacked individual who's going to go be a bodybuilder professional. I mean, there's multiple reasons out there that people work out, and like you said, mental health is one of them. Anything of that nature. There's multiple reasons people work out, really.
Yeah, and definitely if this is not this is so far out of my scope, but I think that like if you have sort of an addictive personality, if you pick up something and that's the only thing you enjoy doing for like a certain period of time, um, definitely if you can make that thing exercise, you're gonna be just fine.
Yeah, I can imagine that being the case. Like someone's like, there are people out there who are in their 60s and 70s that because of working out so continuously throughout their lives,
Hmm.
they maintain an extremely fit body, I guess, or healthy lifestyle. So
Yeah.
that's one of the outcomes of it. But again, there's multiple benefits to working out.
Yeah, like my one of my family members, she's in her 70s now and she's been a cyclist since she was about 20 something.
Hmm.
And she is so fit, so compact, definitely in way better shape than I am. She's 70 something and still able to go on these major biking trips, canoeing trips, just because she's been cycling every day of her life for like the past like 50 years.
That is absolutely incredible. I mean, I hope I can do that one day. And I would actually recommend anyone out there to cycle, because cycling, in my opinion, you can get into a flow state, so to speak, where you
Hmm.
kind of just lose track of time. And next thing you know, you've already biked about like 10 miles and you're still ready to go more. It's an insanely beneficial form of physical activity, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
So before we close, I like to ask my guests around 5 or so quick fire questions, and I allow them to just answer it however they see fit or how they best, understand the question, really. So
Okay.
here we go. First question is, if there is one thing that someone could do to improve their nutrition, what would it be?
Legumes and vegetables. Half your plate vegetables.
If someone were interested in getting into the field of nutrition or sports nutrition,
Hmm.
what advice would you give to them?
So for that, it would be go become a registered dietitian because there are routes from there that you can take to become a sports nutritionist in like the MLB, the NBA, the NFL, but you have to become a registered dietitian first.
If you could share a message with the listeners out there, what would you say?
Wash your hands, don't touch your face, and stay home.
And then the last question, what is the most important thing people should know about dieting?
About dieting, it's all about if you're going to choose a diet, make sure it's something that you can do for the rest of your life.
I'm going to add one more question in there because I usually ask my other guests this and I didn't add it to this list.
Okay.
So it would be, what would you most like to tell people that no one ever asks you about?
Oh, from a nutrition perspective?
Yep.
Okay.
Nutrition, athletics, it could be anything.
Okay. Oh, you need to eat carbohydrates. You shouldn't cut those out, especially if you're an athlete.
That's what I've noticed some people do. They'll just cut out carbs from their diet, and I just realize like you need carbs to kind of
Hmm.
sustain fat in your body and energy. So
Yeah,
it's a really
definitely.
good suggestion.
Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Asia, for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about all things social distancing, dieting, athletics, and everything nutrition all around. And for those out there interested in learning more about you or getting in contact with you, they can do so at your website, compete-nutrition.ca, which is for Canada. And then they can also find you on Instagram and YouTube at compete.nutrition, as well as on YouTube at compete nutrition.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Yeah, been an absolute pleasure. So thank you again, and best of luck with your studies and with being a professional dietitian. So
Thank
thanks
you.
again.
Take care. Wash your hands.
All right, everyone, that will do it for this episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation and learned a thing or two about diet and nutrition. I know I did. For those interested, I will be leaving links to some of the recipes as well as Fitness Blender and Asia's website in the description section of the show. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and follow me on Twitter, or subscribe to the newsletter on my website to get emails every 2 weeks to get early access to updates on upcoming episodes as well as interesting finds. So thanks again for listening, and stay tuned for new episodes of the All Things Interesting podcast.